This regime, it ruled through fear, it ruled through cruelty, and it was sadistic. You've seen the stories of people coming out of prisons, especially the Sadnaya prison in Damascus, which I didn't realize Bashar's palace, you can oversee it. In 2011, it already started in Tunisia, they'd already moved to Egypt, and then it came to Syria. So in 2013, brothers, ISIS saved Bashar al-Assad. By 2016, the regime, with the help of Iran, Hezbollah was there, and then you effectively had Russia carrying out atrocities from the air. That's really what allowed them to get back the bulk of the country. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu to you all. Alhamdulillah. So brothers, it's just giving the brother examples like the London buses. You wait for a long time, and then all of them come along in one go. 13 years, our brothers and sisters in Syria have been fighting this regime, have been trying to defend themselves against a brutal clampdown. And really, in the last week or two, it's all come to a penultimate end. It's one of those events where in the future you'll be asked, where were you? In fact, brothers, this time last week, Aleppo had fallen and the rebel factions were going for Homs and Hama. Damascus was a discussion, will it, won't it? I remember Friday night I was thinking, if Russia, even Russia to intervene now, there's ramification. They're in a war in Ukraine. Iran and its proxy groups have been slaughtered across the region. It's not straightforward for them to intervene. When they did intervene originally, there was no Ukraine war. Iran's situation was completely different. We're in a completely different situation at the moment. So this was Friday night. I think Saturday morning, officially now, Bashar al-Assad legged it. He got on his helicopter and he went to Russia. And this is his first week where he's learned how cold it gets in Russia. Syria won't miss him. He probably won't see the summers of Syria again. He's going to have to deal with the harsh winters of Russia now. So, brothers, all this week, everyone who's anyone, everybody that believed Bashar would survive, everybody that hoped he wouldn't survive, everybody that thought maybe the reformer give him another chance, everyone really has come out and they're shocked at how quickly events took place. Even this time last week, there were still question marks. He spent 13 years surviving. He's got support of Russia, got support of Iran. He can probably still see it through. The rebels, the people of Syria, it's been 13 years. They got close to Damascus once before. Can they, can't they? But you've seen the outpouring of emotion, the jubilation. I don't know if you've seen the images today, the first Jummah in the Umayyad Mosque. You saw the jubilation from the people, the happiness. If you haven't been to Syria, brothers, it's sometimes hard to understand what it's like to actually live there. Once you understand how the regime worked, what it was like to live, really, brothers, what we've seen this week was inevitable. The only difference really is Gaddafi was pulled out of a sewage pipe. That's where his end came. Bashar is sitting in Russia, but let's see how his end comes in the end. But at the start of this year, he probably thought, my family's been running this country for 50 plus years. If I'm lucky, I'll probably get another couple of decades out of it. Not anymore. I'm sure Sheikh Hasina thought that as well, actually, at the start of the year. She just won the election. She probably thought she's got this in the bag. So why did the people rise up? Why is Syria so unique? Even Westerners in the media reporting, they're reporting Syria very differently to the way they reported Tunisia, the way they reported Egypt. What lessons can we learn and what now? What is likely to happen now? What should happen and what shouldn't happen? That's inshallah what I want to look at. So why did the people rise up, brothers? You can only understand this if you understand how oppressive the regime was. There's a famous quote from this speaker. He was quoting a CIA agent. And he said to him that CIA said that if you want a proper interrogation, you to send your prisoners to Egypt. If you want someone dealt with that he never forgets the experience, you send him to Syria. Meaning there's no interrogation in Syria. They are just going to torture you. And if you want to send a message to people, someone's supporter, you send them to Syria. If you want interrogation, you send them to Egypt. And that's really how Syria worked. Bashar al-Assad's only been in power since 2000. His father did a coup. He came in the late 60s. And from that time onwards, brothers, what Bashar al-Assad and his father did and what his family did is they set up a secret state. They set up an oppressive regime. They established power and ruled with fear. So the way, because remember, the Bashar al-Assad family, they're from the Alawites of Syria, who at most are 5 to 7%. So you've got this scenario where 75% of the people are Sunni Muslim. You've got other minority, then you've got the Alawis as well. So how are you going to maintain power in this country when you're a minority? How are you going to maintain power when really you should be in power? You're only in power because the Khilafah ended, the Brits and the French came, they carved it up, and then you've got this country called Syria. Syria, as we have today, brother, never existed in history like this. It was always part of the Al-Sham region. That's why even if you look at the map today, brothers, at least over half of Syria is desert. There's nothing there. If you look at the map from Aleppo, then you've got the coastal areas where the Alawites are, and then you go down Homs, Hama to Damascus. That is where the majority of the population is. Then you've got a small area in the northeast where the Kurds are, because you've got the Euphrates going through there. Other than that, the whole country is basically desert. It's a completely artificial country. And it was created like that for a reason. The whole idea was these nations can't become independent, and they will always be dependent upon a foreign patron. So what Hafiz al-Assad did, Bashar al-Assad's father, is really he ruled, in this country, you've got the government, you've got the local council, you've got institutes, all very public. The people that work in them are civil servants, they're public workers. That's not how these guys ran it. The way they ran it is their army and their intelligence, they ran the country. Even where you had public institutions, really you'd have someone from the intelligence sitting on the board or someone who was running it from behind the scenes. That's how they actually ran it. So if they thought you were up to no good, if they believed you were a threat, in fact, if they believed you weren't a threat, a lot of people were ending up in prison. I'm sure, brother, you've seen the stories of people coming out of prisons, especially the Sadnaya prison in Damascus, which I didn't realize Bashar's palace, you can oversee it. That's how close he was to the prison. And the story, subhanAllah, horrific, and I'm sure more stories are going to come out. I'm sure you saw the story of that brother who was an activist. He went into the prison and then he ended up in Holland. He's given an interview and he went back thinking it was okay. And they found his body and subhanAllah, some of the pictures. This regime, it ruled through fear, it ruled through cruelty, and it was sadistic. It was actually sadistic. Some of the stories, subhanAllah, brothers, you wish you didn't hear them. You got people in their 60s, 70s coming out of prison. There were people coming out. I saw one uncle today, he'd never seen a cell phone in his life. That's how long he's been in. I remember life before a cell phone. Just imagine all those years you're inside. You got a couple of people, the execution was on the day the regime fell. Just imagine that. You've got used to the idea, this is it. One of them was saying that there was a lot of commotion, so he thought they're queuing people up to execute them. And they've opened his door, and he's like, okay, it's my turn. And they're trying to tell him, no, the regime's fallen, you're going to go out, and he couldn't believe it. Just imagine that, brothers. You're waiting for someone to get you for your execution. You got the horrific stories of sisters, children born in there. This is how the regime worked. This is why, brothers, when the Arab Spring began back in 2011, it was inevitable it would come to Syria. Because when you oppress the people, when you're unjust to them, your regime may last, but you're actually laying the seeds of your own overthrow eventually. Because what will happen is, if people are living in fear, if people are living as if though they're dead, well, what's the difference between fighting the regime and not fighting the regime? It's the same. And if you remember, brothers, take your mind back, the uprising in Tunisia started when that brother Mohammed Bouazizi, he just wanted to set up a fruit stall in the market. This was a graduate, the economy wasn't functioning, there was loads of corruption, he just wanted to set up a fruit stall. There was some altercation, The rumor is one of the inspectors slapped him, and that led to him doing a number of things. He went in front of the council building and set himself alive. That's technically where it all started from, right? Because for him, what's the difference between living and not living? That's the situation she was in. So it was inevitable it was going to come to Syria. By that, in 2011, it had already started in Tunisia. It had already moved to Egypt. And then it came to Syria. And Egypt, Syria, Libya, these are not places you rise up. These countries have a history of massacring whole towns, of committing atrocities. There was one uncle who came out of prison. He was a pilot. He was ordered to fire at people in the Hama massacre in 1982. And he didn't, and he was thrown into prison. And he's only come out now. You got people, especially when the revolution started in 2011, the regime strategy was, we are going to do a huge clampdown. I saw pictures today, brothers. Literally, you've got areas they're on the outskirts of Damascus, so it's the capital. So I live in East London, brothers, Walthamstow. That is, you could say, it's a suburb of London. That's how close you are. These towns look like apocalyptic towns. Literally, you could see through the building. That's how bad the attacks were. This is the level this regime went to, and that's why, bro, it was only natural that these people were going to rise up. And actually, when the Syrian people rose up in 2011, they didn't actually rise up violently. They just wanted their rights. They just said, there's an uprising going on. We want to be able to live in dignity. We want to be able to live without being monitored. And we want to be able to live where our fathers and our brothers aren't picked up and they disappear. So I'm sure there'll be loads of stories coming out. There's already few where there's one sister, she was a mum, and she was saying that for years she just kept going around to different intelligence facility and prison to another just to find her father. From one to another. They would just push her around. And she was saying in one particular prison, she got on their nerves so much they actually gave her more details than they were supposed to. That was the life they were living. So forget your daily making your ends meet, forget a job, forget who am I going to marry. For these people in Syria, it was literally about survival. It's about family, friends you grew up with who have disappeared. This was the situation this was in. And that's why, brothers, when it started in 2011, this is not something the regime prepared for. Remember, this regime was, we're going to be cruel and oppressive, we're going to monitor you, and that should be enough for the regime to survive. So you don't prepare for a revolution, nobody does. And in fact, in 2010, did anybody think Egypt and these places there'd be a revolution? So because you don't prepare for them, what you do when they do happen is you do what you know, which is you oppressive people come down even hard, which actually makes things even worse, and in the long run is sowing the seeds of your own decline. So the biggest problem Bashar al-Assad had when the uprising started was, the problem was it was everywhere. It didn't start in one area, it started in one area, then it moved. So the way Syria worked is in the main urban areas, that's where you have intelligence, you have prisons. But if there's an uprising everywhere, remember you've got 25 million population, you are at least 17 to 20 million are Sunni Muslim. They've all risen up. Even if you get the other minorities with you, you're outnumbered. And that's exactly what happened in 2011. So Bashar had a very big problem. Where do you send your troops? If you send all your troops to the north, there's no troops in the east. You send them to the west, there's no troops in the south. So basically, he got caught on the back foot, right? And I'm sure you remember the images in there. Now, this is 2011. 2013, brothers, Bashar admitted in a speech with his parliament, with his supporters. He actually said that, look, we've lost the north of the country. Basically, if I send my forces there, there's no one to defend Damascus and the surrounding areas. So what he effectively said was the job of the intelligence service and the army now is to defend the lower half of the country. Because what was going on by that point, rebel groups were emerging. People had defected from the army and they'd taken over the north of the country. So when they're about to launch an attack on Homs and then go for Damascus, out of nowhere, a group emerged from Iraq. And where did they go? They didn't go to Damascus to fight the regime. They went to the north of the country, which was already under rebel control. So in 2013, brothers, ISIS saved Bashar al-Assad. And in fact, there's plenty of research out there. ISIS didn't fight the regime. All ISIS did was fight the rebel forces, or it fought the people. You know, when the West say now they're a bit worried ISIS might re-emerge again. They've got nothing to worry about. ISIS don't kill non-Muslims. ISIS target Muslims. Their research shows that. If anyone needs to worry about ISIS, it's us lot. Actually, not those lot. They've been the victims of, okay, a few bombings. Really, ISIS, if you look at all the research done, they only target Muslims, which raises a big question mark. So 2013, that's how Bashar al-Assad survived. So the rebels had a big problem. What do you do? If we're being encircled, you're going to have to cool off. So that's what they did. Unfortunately, the rebel groups had to go and take over the northern areas again. But you find by 2015, Bashar realized again, a lot of my armies defected. They've actually joined the other side. And he admitted again, I remember July 2015, he said in a speech that the regime is struggling for survival, right? And on this occasion, Russia came and saved the day. Those are the so this is important, brothers. The regime never survived, never lasted this long because it had depth, it was strong. It had fear on its side. It had atrocities on its side, but it needed external support. And that's what happened in 2015. And unfortunately, brothers, by 2016, the regime, with the help of Iran, and Iran, Hezbollah was there. Iran brought in loads of militia from around the region. And then you effectively had Russia carrying out atrocities from the air. That's really what allowed them to get back the bulk of the country, right? So really, Bashar owed his survival to these guys. So from 2016 up until about 2020, what you find, brothers, is multiple rebel groups emerged. The rebel groups are fighting. In fact, the front line between the rebel groups and the regime and its supporters, it went backwards and forwards. But the fall of Damascus was no longer a discussion after 2016. So what you find, brothers, is different rebel groups came to be supported by different regional countries. So you saw the Saudis starting to support groups, Salafi groups. When I mean support, they were providing them arms. These guys were traveling to these countries. They were getting trained. You saw Turkey support some of the groups. So the Syrian National Army, the SNA, this is Turkish-backed. Turkish intelligence has been providing them with arms. They've been training them. And this also included people that defected from the Syrian army. You had UAE. UAE supported some groups. You had Jordan in the south. They were supporting some groups. And then you had Western nations who actually started supporting some of the groups. So America, for example, it has openly supported the Kurds who are in the northeast of the country. Until this day, America still supports them, it arms them, it trains them. And we can talk about this in the Q&A, a little bit of a long history with the Americans and the Kurds. Now, on face value, what these countries said is, yeah, Bashar is very oppressive, and we are supporting the people of Syria in order to overthrow him. That's what they said at face value. And then all these years went by, and you could see the rebels didn't actually make much progress. In fact, what you find, despite the arms and equipment, they weren't making much progress. The rebel groups actually admit now that the amount of weapons we needed were never provided. And in fact, what started to happen was a lot of the rebel groups were told by the countries supporting them, you need to start going to the talks, you need to start going to the conferences, you need to start going to the international summits. So I've never heard of Astana before. It's a place in Kazakhstan. And for some reason, loads of conferences about Syria were happening over there. And I'm going to come back to this point because you effectively had, brothers, foreign countries deciding what should happen in Syria. The people from Syria who were invited to these meetings were handpicked or they were never even invited. So you had a couple of these meeting summits. There were no Syrians there. There were foreign power and regional countries talking about what should happen in Syria. So really, the support of the West actually crippled the uprising. Now it should be quite clear, they never supported the overthrow of Bashar. What they did, they supported both sides. And I'm going to come back to this because there's a lot of question marks people have got about how is it that all of a sudden in 2 weeks it's all unraveled. 13 years you couldn't achieve this, then in 2 weeks it's happened. Right? It's a legitimate question which we'll come to, inshallah. In 2016, brothers, Aleppo fell. Aleppo really was the northern area of the country. This is where the rebels, this was their base. When that fell, with a lot of Russian help, with a lot of atrocities, for a lot of people, that was the end of this uprising. In fact, from 2016 onwards, even the media stopped talking about it. So that's why now everyone's got to fill in the gap now. What's been going on from since 2016, and then since COVID 2020, what's been going on. So you find, brothers, in 2016, the way the country looked is half the country was with the regime, the northeast of the country is with the Kurds, and then the northwest of the country is where these rebel groups are, or what remains of them. So right next to the Turkish border. You even saw Turkish incursions into Syria because they weren't happy about the Kurds. So you had the Kurds, that was one faction. You had the Syrian National Army, which was a coalition of groups that Turkey backed. And then you had what they call the Islamist groups. These were the Islamic-minded groups. And the largest amongst them at that time, brothers, was al-Sham. Now, al-Sham was a coalition of like 20 plus groups. And what you find with these groups, brothers, there were various times where they came together. There was various times where they fought each other. And there's various times where they went and did their own thing. al-Sham today, brothers, is HTS. And I'm sure we're going to talk about Jolani and his group. They have morphed and chopped and changed their stripes many times throughout the last 13 years. He started off as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He ended up in Syria. In Syria, he fought against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He fought against other groups. And now here we are. And what's shocking this week, brothers, is I've never seen someone on the terrorist list who people are talking so much about removing them off the terrorist list. Like, where have you ever seen that before? You know, usually it's like, oh my God, they're going to Damascus. It was just like, oh, maybe we need to rethink. And in fact, the discussion is, can someone really reform? Can we really trust them? Right? But the problem is, whatever you think, they're on the road to Damascus and they're going to be taken over. So you see them change their tune really, really quickly. Right? But remember, he's on the terrorist list, If these guys have no problem with genocidal maniacs in Israel, what's a terrorist? There's nothing, really. And I think that's the context you've got to understand this in. It's a bit of a debate, should we, shouldn't we, can we really trust him, But he's going to be, remember Modi of India? His hands are clean, but they've embraced him, And Bashar al-Assad's regime, remember, this guy was a reformer. He was being invited back into the international community now. So if you got no problem with these sort of guys, really you shouldn't have a problem with this guy as well. So you find, brothers, from 2016, once Aleppo really fell, the regime still had a problem. Although Aleppo fell, Bashar has been saying since 2020, I am the legitimate ruler of all of Syria. I've regained the country back. The rebels have lost, the uprising finished. So the international community should embrace me. So you find the Arab League started embracing him. I remember last year, there was Hungary, Austria, and another country in the EU Parliament. They were saying we should basically bring Bashar back into the international community. So, they were saying, like, he's won. We considered him a reformist in the first place. And he's basically won the country, so we should invite him back in. But the reality was, brothers, the rebel group still existed in the Idlib area next to Turkey. We now know that a lot of information coming out, these guys have been training, and their plan actually was for years to try and take back Aleppo again, with significant help from Turkey. And some of these groups, brother, you'll find, especially the ones who Turkey backed, some of these groups ended up in Libya fighting, and they even ended up in Azerbaijan fighting with Turkey. So these groups are very, very close to Turkey. Turkey's actually sent them to other countries. So Bashar's argument is, I don't need to negotiate with these groups. I don't even need to negotiate with Turkey about these groups. I'm the legitimate ruler of the whole of Syria. Erdogan, you need to get with it. That was his point. So every once in a while, the regime would launch strikes into the northern areas. And what Bashar was finding, what the Russians were finding, is these guys seem to be quite capable, because they've had a lot of Turkish help. And basically, this is not going to be an easy job. So this is now challenging Bashar's claim to, I control the whole country. So Bashar, at least for the last 2-3 years, was actually planning a major operation to take back Aleppo and target these guys in the northern area next to Turkey. These groups were getting ready for a major operation to take back Aleppo. So what you saw in the last week or so is a culmination of that. However, there were certain things that happened that no one anticipated. So Turkey was even reaching out diplomatically to Bashar. that let's sit down, let's sort this out. What Turkey was saying that, look, let's come to some sort of agreement where let's make the northern areas semi-autonomous. Turkey will maintain the border and take care of them, and the rest of the country is yours. And Bashar's basically saying, over my dead body, I rule over the whole country. In fact, I've won. Why do I even need to negotiate? Yeah, he's probably sitting in a cold Russian home at the moment, thinking maybe he should have taken that deal. Yeah, but as far as he was concerned, I've taken back bulk of the country. Why should I actually negotiate? So what happened last week, brothers, was when Bashar's forces were sent in numbers to take back Aleppo, what ended up happening is when the rebels fought them, most of the army that was sent to go and fight put down their arms and legged it, and they didn't bother fight. So Aleppo didn't fall because there was this big fight and the rebels won. The rebels won because these guys actually didn't bother fight. So remember, some of these guys have been fighting for 10 plus years. A lot of these guys aren't getting paid. The economy is completely messed up. But more importantly for Bashar, you've only survived because of Iran and Russia. Russia now has a bigger, a more important war to deal with, which is Ukraine. Russia is not interested in any major escalation. Iran is in retreat because Hezbollah has been decimated. Hamas is struggling for survival. And Israel and you have actually been in direct attacks. So the last thing Iran wants is another major escalation. And the problem is if there's any major escalation now 13 years down the line, that completely contradicts Bashar's narrative that I've taken back the whole country. So when Aleppo fell this time last week, brothers, it became very clear there's nothing there in the regime. The regime's hollow. It exists only in name. And this is the problem with autocratic dictatorial regimes. Really, there's nothing there. They rely on the fear. So if people overcome that fear, they will overwhelm them. And this is what actually happens in a coup. So really, when Aleppo fell, really, if you work in a prison, if you're in intelligence, if you're in the army, you got to think, basically, do you want to be on the receiving end when these guys come down? Right? And that's why today I'm hearing all Western journalists have gone and they got there's loads of uniforms on the side of roads, tanks that are empty. It makes sense. I saw a video the other day where there was some army guys going in their uniform. So they got pulled over, and they're lucky they didn't get killed. They got pulled over and the brother reminded them that, remember what you did to us, but Islam doesn't permit us to do to you what you did to us. Yeah? Someone else might have done something different. The thing with these guys is, they never planned for the day after. They never planned for the regime being gone. Now that's actually happening. So just think about it, all these people that carried out the torture in the prisons. Just think, doing these sort of things to other humans. Did they ever think this is going to come back on me? Did he ever think that there will be a day the regime will be gone, I might be held accountable for this? For them, that was never going to happen. But this week, that day came. So all of these guys, what they're finding now is they've got no job. And they've been walking around, and actually people are just so happy that the regime's gone. There's actually even been no retribution. There's no one going around, I want to go back and go after my torturers. And in fact, what I find really funny is in any other country, brothers, yeah, if something like this happened, they will say, look, the new regime needs to secure the prisons, you can't let criminals out. No one said that here because there's no criminals in prison. It's all innocent people in prison, it's all people bad. There's no criminals. What I find really funny is some people took their cameras into the prisons. You never get that here. Can you walk into prison with your camera and film? This is the situation of Syria. People are just so happy. People know where their loved ones are who have disappeared. Let's just all go to the prisons, try and find them. And you see in the prisons, there's not like rioting going on. I mean, there was one rioting one, but people just want to look for their loved ones. This is the situation in this country. So, what you find, brothers, is Bashar's attempt for a final defeat of the rebels in the north really resulted in his own defeat in the end. And in the end, what you see, brothers, there's nothing there in the regime. There's nothing there, it's all hollow. In fact, his supporters in Russia and in Iran, even they didn't come and save the day. Yeah? So we will find out in time when he finally worked out. My view is, brothers, last weekend, for some reason, all these leaders were in Doha. There was conferences going on. And I suspect in fact, there was a meeting between Iran, Russia, and Turkey. And that's probably when it was agreed, let's call it a day. He's finished. And if he was sensible, he got out quicker, yeah? We didn't have the Hasina scenario where they took over a palace. We didn't get the Gaddafi scenario. But nevertheless, you got the scenario where he's gone. And I'm sure, brothers, in the next weeks, months, and years, you'll hear more and more horrific stories of how this regime survived. So that's how it came to be in the end, brothers. It's a bit like 13 years in the end happened in literally just 2 weeks. There was literally nothing there in the regime. There's no Hezbollah to come and save the day. There's no Iraqi militia to come and save the day. In fact, Iran actually now has its own internal issues. Right? You remember that sister that died, Masa Amini. That showed the Iranian regime we've got significant internal issues we've got to deal with. It's all very well doing external things. And Russia, Ukraine was always going to be a million times more important to Russia. So that's where we are. So what lessons can we learn, brothers? One major lesson is, brothers, our Ummah never gave up. And I can't explain to you how important this is. When you live in Syria, when whole towns have been flattened, brothers, I saw this machine they used in Savnia prison on one of the videos. SubhanAllah, it's a machine where they basically flattened someone. Our Ummah still didn't give up. They still kept at it. So really what you've had is the regime has faced a simmering rebellion for 13 years. It doesn't matter how great your economy is, you can't, to have a rebellion going on for that long, it costs, you've got to have troops everywhere. Even if you commit atrocities, if the people are rebelling and it goes on, it's a problem for you in the long run. And the thing with Bashar is, he's not going to win the hearts and minds of the people now. That's not going to happen. So the Ummah really never gave up. The rebels couldn't have done what they did unless the Ummah had given up. In fact, the Ummah could have told them, don't do this, it's going to be bad for us. They didn't. So that's really, really important. And this actually creates a bit of an interesting dynamic in the region, which I'll come to, inshallah. I mentioned before, brothers, the reality of authoritarian regimes is all a mirage. The fear they create is an image. Underneath it all, there's nothing there. And probably the best example I can give you, some of you are old enough to remember this, is the Soviet Union was also a very authoritarian regime. 20 million people basically monitored all the Soviet Union. Brothers, in the end, the Soviet Union themselves dissolved the Soviet Union. They had enough of it. So it may take a while, but the reality is if you're unjust to the people, if you don't serve their needs, in the long run, the odds are against you. As Gaddafi learned the hard way, and as Hosni Mubarak learned the hard way as well. So this is important, brothers, because in any uprising, you can have ups and downs. I remember people saying, look at Yemen, civil war, look at Libya, civil war, look at Syria. And people saying, oh, was the Arab Spring worth it? If you lived in Syria, you won't be saying things like that. And the Ummah didn't give up. And this now creates a problem for the other rulers. What the Syrian people, because remember in Syria, you don't rise up. These are not countries where you do these things because you see what happens. So authoritarian regimes, it's an image, really. And the West actually did their bit to create this image as well. Bashar, we need him. We need him for terrorists in the region. In the 2 Iraq wars, Syria supported America. Right? And more importantly, brothers, let me tell you how important Syria was for America. When 9/11 happened, they did the war on terror. The CIA were looking at, look, we're going to have to torture people to get information. So they go, look, we can't do it in America because even their own troops won't do it. So they created black sites around the world, right? And a couple of these black sites were in Syria. So, this image of Bashar in Iran, they're against the anti-imperialist. Yeah. Well, if you're anti-imperialist and you hate America, you won't be giving them prisons, would you, in your own country? So what you find, brothers, is Syria actually has played a very key role in America's agenda for the region. This we hate America, America doesn't like Syria because it's a state sponsor of terrorism. Really, this is just for show. What you find behind the scenes, consistently, they've been working together on different issues. And the reason why this is, brothers, is the al-Asad family, they really stayed in power for 53 years for 2 reasons. Internally, I've explained to you, they ran a brutal state. Externally, what they did is we'll help whatever the global powers agenda is for the region. You want troops, you want torture, you want us to defend Israel. When the Arab Spring started in 2011, brothers, Israeli officials were coming out one after the other saying, look, this regime, it can't fall. The most secure border Israel has is the Golden Heights border with Syria. In other countries, you might have a stray missile that goes to Israel. From Syria, there's never been a stray missile that's gone into Israel. And the reason why the al-Asad did this is if we maintain cordial relations with Israel, that will give us good relations with America, then these guys won't overthrow us. They just have to manage the internal population. And that's how these guys survived. And that's why you find Israel did have a problem with Syria. The problem was different though. They liked Bashar and his father from the perspective they maintained the Golden Heights. But the problem with them is Syria's relationship with Iran. That was always a problem for them. So that's why during the last 13 years, Israel regularly carried out strikes in Syria against Hezbollah, against Islamic Revolutionary Guards. They never targeted the regime. They had no problem with the regime, but they had a problem with the regime relationship. And that's why, brothers, what has Israel done the day the regime's fallen? They've done what they've always dreamed about. You have a country on our border, we basically going to get rid of every weapon that could be a threat to us. That's what they're doing. So this new regime that's come in now in Syria, there's literally nothing you can do. What are you going to do? So what they're doing is they're making sure Israel, every chemical site. I actually saw a letter on Twitter. This is from one of the prisons. It was a letter from an intelligence officer in Syria. They even had a stamp on to Israel on the Iranian sites within Syria. Because you know what Iran was doing, although they were helping Bashar, yeah, they were actually setting up to stay there in the long term. So for example, all the people that shifted to the north of the country, they were replaced by Shias from other parts and from outside. Iran was basically setting up bases to remain there for a long time, right? Which if you're Bashar, it's like, thank you for your help, but time for you to go now. That's not what they're planning to do. So you can't trust these guys. In fact, Hezbollah now has learned the hard way. You know, Hezbollah's whole leadership got taken out, right? Israelis have said for years, we have tried to penetrate Hezbollah in Lebanon, never been able to get through. These guys have a solid structure, they know how to work, right? And then all of a sudden, Israel taken out their whole leadership, right? And the curse of Hezbollah was that they went into Syria. Brothers, who would have believed it? They've gone into Syria, they've saved the regime. Yeah, but what happened when they saved the regime is the structure below the leadership had to engage with Syrian intelligence, had to engage with Russia, and that allowed them to be infiltrated, and it allowed Israel to get a lot of intelligence about them. That's because remember, you could take out one leader if you're lucky. To take out a whole leadership, someone had to give you that, and Hezbollah knows that came from Syria. And remember, who would know who their whole leadership is, where they are? That would have needed someone quite senior who had to engage with their senior leadership. So Hezbollah, if you think about it, brothers, they're probably thinking, we saved the regime, look at how great we are. And look at how that's turned into their menace now. Now the whole leadership's gone. So Hezbollah can't even come and save them. So authoritarian regimes, brothers, what you find is they have a hammer, and they just always assume that the hammer will always work. But what they don't realize, yeah, is if massive people come out on the streets, no amount of hammer is going to stop it. If millions of people came into Damascus, there's not enough of you to stop them. You can kill as many as you can, but if you've been treating the people so badly, people won't mind. And that's where this country was. The other lesson, brothers, is Erdogan of Turkey. I'm sure for the last year you're questioning, this guy's made his whole career out of supporting Palestine. And we've seen when it's come to the time of need of Palestine, where is he? He used to talk a lot about Palestine. That talking was fine. Now you need to deliver when the Palestinians need you, when Gaza needed you. And what you find is he's still talking. He's not doing anything. So that raises a lot of questions. However, if you look at what Turkey's been doing in Syria, we had 13 years where the rebels tried and then failed to overthrow the regime. And all that time they've been backed by Turkey. Then all of a sudden in 2 weeks, they go and overthrow the regime. So why couldn't they do that before? Why did Erdogan not support that before? What you find for the last 10 years, I've had various arguments. If Turkey goes into Syria, yeah, Russia's there, so they can't do that. If Turkey goes into Syria, Iran's there and they don't want a war, right? But there's a problem with this. For the last 10 years, Turkey's been at war with Russia in Libya. Turkey's been at war with Russia in the Caucasus and defeated them. So they've actually been at war with Russia, so why can't they go to war with Russia here? And then more importantly, brother, in the last week, what have they done? They've supported rebel groups who've overthrown the leader Russia's been backing. So how come now you could do this, but you couldn't do it for the last 13 years? And fundamentally, brother, what this comes down to is, if you look at in Syria, Turkey keeps talking about the Kurds. They have a problem with the Kurds. The Kurds basically run about 30% of the country. So it's not the most important piece of the country, but nevertheless 30% is a significant amount. These Kurds, America arms them. America's been training them. In fact, America's even set up prisons there where most of the ISIS guys are in prison at the moment. Right? So Turkey's been fighting these guys because the Kurds in Syria, from them come the Kurds that are fighting the regime in Turkey. So really, for the last 13 years, Turkey's been more busy dealing with the Kurds than dealing with overthrowing the regime. And that's why this is important, because Erdogan's built his career that I support the Ummah, I support Palestine. And now you can measure him. When the Ummah needed you in Syria, when the Ummah needed you in Palestine, where were you? His interests are actually a lot more narrow. It's not as broad as he makes it out to be. And that makes him not that different to these Western leaders talk the talk, but they actually say something very different. And you find that same with Erdogan now. And now, I mean, if you think about it, now Gaza needed you. Now Lebanon needed you. Now wasn't the time to talk. Now was the time to actually deliver. So what's Erdogan playing at? He's got very limited goals. The difference between Erdogan and our other Muslim rulers is Erdogan takes credit for what he does, so people believe he's a very strong leader. For some reason, our other leaders can't do that. They're not very capable politicians. But we need to measure Erdogan on his action, not what he says. He says a lot. Yeah, his action is what you need to measure him by. And what should now be clear, brothers, is the rebel groups, they got a lot of Western support. The Western support was never enough to overthrow the regime. Because in the end, brother, the regime fell. The regime didn't fall because there was a big fight and the rebels outfought them and defeated them. These guys didn't put up a fight. They put their arms down and legged it. That's why to ask me why this happened so quickly, it happened so quickly because the regime itself, I think, so when Iran and Russia ain't coming, forget this. Iran and Russia has basically propped up the regime all this time. So that's why it happened really quickly. So what next, brothers? So we've had a week. Like I said, 1 week is like it's like 13 years happening in 1 week. So everybody is looking at what's coming out of Syria. So the rebels that have taken over, Jolani, they're already putting out feelers, yeah? And I wish I could be more positive, brothers, but the feelers they're putting out leave a lot to be desired. So already they've not said anything about the Israeli attacks going on. Already they're saying, in fact, they've actually maintained the old regime. They've already had a meeting and most of the old regime was there as well. Some of them are going to remain. They're talking about bringing in the free market. So, 13 years so really the problem there is, look, Bashar al-Assad was one person. No regime is one guy. What you need is institutions, structures, systems. You need lots of other people, right? All of those have to be removed. Otherwise, this ain't regime change. This is really one, and that's what we've had in Egypt, where the guy at the top was removed, but everything else remained in place. Now, this is what the Syrian people and we need to be aware of, because at the moment, brothers, everyone's telling Syria where the direction they should go. Even the West, who don't have a good track record of their electoral system at the moment, they are saying what they expect to see. So the only caveat I will say, brothers, these rebel groups here, they've been fighting for 13 years. So it's not like they've had time to sit down, let's write a constitution, all of that. Even at the moment, brothers, we've not seen them say these are the principles we're going to govern by. These are the principles that are going to drive us. What you're seeing is they're trying to please the world that, look, you've got nothing to worry about. The regime's gone, we're not extreme. That's what they're doing at the moment. So really, we don't want the last 13 years to be in vain, where what happened, everything remains apart from the guy at the top. Yeah. So that's one key thing that's happening. As I mentioned, brothers, everyone, even the West, are now having meetings, and there'll probably be conferences on what should happen in Syria. And this is important because when the revolution was going on, you found there was lots of meetings going on in Astana, in Riyadh, in Zurich, talking about what should happen in Syria, but it didn't involve the Syrian people, right? So the people over there have to ensure they decide what happens in their country. And they seem to, time and time again, you just see the Islamic sentiments come out. You see it time and time again, right? So I think what's probably going to happen, they're going to try and blur the lines that we don't want an Islamist thing. Because already you're seeing, 2019, brother, Donald Trump said ISIS is finished, we've defeated them. The Kurds have said we defeated them. So why all of a sudden is there an ISIS threat all of a sudden now? Why is there a threat ISIS might re-emerge? But you defeated them. You yourself have said, in fact, Trump's argument is, why are there 1,000 American troops in Syria? We defeated ISIS. I remember one funny example. Trump was on the phone. So Trump's always said, he's against his forever wars, and he's always against American troops being in Syria. He was in a phone call with Erdogan, and Erdogan asked him, look, why are your troops still there? Like, we've got the North Turkey. We've got the north of Syria. Like, why are your troops there? And he's like, we're fighting ISIS, isn't it? He goes, but you defeated ISIS. And he goes, yeah, you're absolutely right. He gets off the phone. He tweets, I've just spoken to Erdogan. Why on earth are our troops in Syria? Basically, I'm removing our troops from Syria. It took Congress 2 weeks here to pass a law where he can't do that. This was a scenario going on in this country. But the whole world, brothers, the West, like, they feel they've got a right, yeah, to tell Syria. Because what they're arguing is, we don't want Syria to become a breeding ground for extremists, yeah? But that was the justification you used for Bashar before. We need the hard man. You need the militant guy to keep this under wraps. But remember, ISIS came from Iraq, from the American occupation. The Kurds in the north, you've been arming them. The rebel groups, you've been arming them. If there's any problem in Syria, you're the fault. It's not the Syrian people who've been arming these people. You guys are the problem. So really, what you're seeing is interference. What you're seeing is like, we have a right? This last election, brothers, in America, until election day, there were questions, if Trump don't win, he won't accept the result, there's going to be a civil war. That's the situation in this country. In this country, we've had 5-6 leaders in the last 5-6 years. These guys are in no position to be telling Syria how you should govern, how you should work. In fact, even their interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, how did they turn out? They weren't great. So even intellectually, brothers, these guys are in no position to be telling the Syrian people, this is what needs to happen in your country. And more importantly, these guys worked with Bashar. They said they're against Bashar, but didn't really help to overthrow him. And now all of a sudden, they care about the people. Yeah, I remember very clearly, brothers, when the uprising in Syria started, Hillary Clinton went on TV. And she said, look, Bashar's he's a reformer, we've got to give him time. That's what they're saying. And this reformer thing was coming up again now the last couple of years. This is the face of these people. Now, the other thing, brothers, is we need to get involved in the future of Syria. If we don't become the eyes and the ears, if we don't explain the sentiments of the people, then what will happen is the West will get involved and they will impose and they will force. So really, brother, this is the Sham region. They were prayed today in the Umayyad mosque from the 7th century. The history of this region is Islamic. The last 100 years is where it went a bit funny, but the Europeans came over. The history, the sentiments, even the non-Muslims there, brothers, the Armenians, the Kurds, there's a long Islamic history. So really, that's where we come into discuss. That's what we need to be discussing. The sentiments of the people are with Islam. You know, already now they're talking about minorities. You know, we've got to make sure minorities are protected, yeah? I never used to hear this when Bashar was in power. You didn't care. In fact, then, they didn't even care about the majority then. So, you've overthrown the regime. Surely you need to take care of the majority who were neglected. Now they're talking about the minorities. And actually, again, they're in no position to be talking about how to deal with minorities. But Bashar fell on Sunday morning. On Monday, they started freezing Syrian refugee applications in Europe. I mean, there's no shame with these people. No shame. It's just like, oh, thank God, this burden, and you can finally go back. Now, you'll never see them say that about Ukrainians. You would never say that. It's just like, oh, thank God it's fallen, I just go back, yeah? Like, you don't even know, like, what's going on, what's going to happen. So really, our role here is we got to be the voice, like in Palestine, we're the voice for them over here. Here we deal with the propaganda that was coming out about that, but we do the same again with Syria. We need to be their voices. We need to counter. And again, brothers, the West, they're not in some superior position. They're in no position to be articulating this is what should happen in Syria. No position whatsoever. In fact, I would say they need to take care of their own countries, really. The other thing, brothers, is we need to be aware of the Western agenda. So Joe Biden, his speech talking about Syria the other day, he said, congratulate the people. Finally, the people can move on, take control of their country. The country can serve them. He said that when America actually occupies 30% of the country. The whole northeast area with the Kurds, America occupies it. So if you want the people to become independent, and those are where the oil fields are as well. Right? So this is what I mean by the interests of the people is not the interest these guys have. Right? These guys really, if you look at it, last 13 years, they could have overthrown the regime. They didn't. The regime's time's come to an end. Now they've split sides. But it's important we highlight these contradictions. You've got this other scenario, brothers. The Kurds, the Syrian SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, they call them. So this is a Western-backed group here. Then you've got the Syrian National Army, SNA, and then you've got the Islamic groups that are Turkish-backed, right? And Turkey is an ally of America, they're in NATO. So you've got two allies that you're supporting fighting each other. This is the dirty game these guys play. And there's loads of examples I can give you, brothers, that just doesn't even make sense. Yeah? But what these guys do, yeah, Syria is a very important country, brothers. It's right at the heart of the Middle East. It borders Turkey, it borders Iraq, it borders Jordan, it has a border with Israel. You control this country, you are in the middle of the region. You want stability for Israel, you've got to control this country. This is why Syria was always very important for the West. That's why they can't afford for Syria to go into an independent hand. They can't see Syria go back to the people. What they obviously realize is the brutality of the regime, his days were numbered. So you'll have a different type of regime, but remember, when it comes to Syria's foreign policy, they don't want that to change. And don't be surprised, brothers, if what we get here is if you want investment, if you want development, then you need to normalize relations with Israel. And if Israel's taking out all their military and all their sites, the leaders or whoever the leaders will become of Syria, they're going to be pushed into a corner. I remember Trump is already saying he wants to reignite the Abraham Accords again. Yeah, which took a bit of it came to a standstill under Biden. So really, these guys are playing a really, really dirty game. So just keep in mind, brothers, yeah, even Russia's intervention, brothers, yeah. If Russia and America are enemies, they're supporting different sides in Syria. Both have got assets in the country. Russia's got a naval base. Russia's got its air force there. Had about 5,000, 7,000 troops there. Not a huge amount, but you got them there. They're crisscrossing Syria, committing atrocities, firing there. You got American bases in the region. You got American troops in that country. How comes if Russia and America are enemies, there was never a fight against each other? There was never a stray missile. There was never a fighter jet accidentally took out another fighter jet. In fact, brothers, when Russia intervened in 2015, within 6 months, Russia and America came up with a protocol on how they were operating in Syria. Now, as far as I understand, brother, that's not how two enemies work. When enemies work, you don't talk to each other, you hate each other, and you look for any advantage. So remember what's going on here. If you want the rebel groups to come to you, the rebel groups got to feel there's an enemy trying to kill them. That enemy is Russia, enemy is Iran, that enemy is the Syrian leadership. They now come over to you, but you've never provided with the arms or the equipment that is going to be enough to overthrow the regime. That's called cooperation. That's not called your enemy. And these things, brothers, we need to call them out. And some Westerners are. One good thing social media has done, brothers, is People can see this. And now, brother, Sky News, BBC, all the mainstream channels, this is all fake news. No one follows them. Everyone's getting the news from TikTok, from Instagram, from podcasts. In fact, podcasts are the mainstream news. And what you find, brothers, is what's being talked about on podcasts is completely different to what you see in the mainstream media. Completely different whatsoever. So this, brothers, we need to be aware of this agenda. Look, our brothers and sisters in Syria, brothers, they've gone through a horrific 50 years, a horrific 13 years. They are just happy. I even saw the morning Bashar fell, there was the Fajr prayer. Just think about that, brothers. You could. I've seen some people, some of the people that were supposed to get executed, brother, their crime was he went to pray Fajr in the mosque. That was actually their crime. That first Fajr on the Sunday morning, the people were just happy they could do that and they didn't have to fear. Because if you went to the mosque, basically you're going to get arrested. That's how it was. So this stuff we need to highlight, we need to expose, and it really showed the hypocrisy. Because what you'll find is the people in Syria, they may accept things not knowing the wider implications. We've got the bandwidth and the time to sit down, study, understand. They don't have that. You've got scenario people coming out of prison didn't know what a cell phone was. You got people coming. I think there was one scenario they thought the Iraqi army had invaded because there was a possibility they were going to in the 1980s. But they thought the Iraqi armies come in and finally conquer the country. Bro, this is like 1980. But I was born 1979. Like, just imagine, like, I was a kid and these people are being in prison. So we need to be their eyes and ears. That's really our role. And that role really is exposing, showing the plots and plans, showing what they're up to. Because if we don't inform the Ummah, they're only going to get one side. Yeah? And I've already mentioned, Jolani, these guys who are taking over, there's question marks and they're leaving a lot to be desired. So really, we are going to be the eyes and the ears of these people. And the final thing, brothers, and this is probably a really positive thing. The Arab Spring's back on. The Arab Spring was what? To rise up and remove rulers who didn't represent the people. And everybody thought the countries where that did happen, they're finished. And Syria, the Arab Spring completely failed. What Syria showed, which is probably the most brutal country to rise up, it is possible as long as you don't give up. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. And brothers, Egypt today is in a worse place today than it was on the eve of the Arab Spring. You speak to any Egyptian, the economy is in shambles, the leaders more autocratic and more brutal. And today, brothers, you had Egypt, Tunisia, you had Syria, you had Bahrain, these countries. Now there's actually discontent even broader in Algeria, in Sudan, Lebanon's completely fallen apart, in Iran, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. Actually, the people's demand for change or people's discontent is much more broader. So the Arab Spring, brothers, what people wanted, today their situation is far worse than it was then. So basically, even if Syria didn't happen, you're going to have another uprising. Because you've got leaders who are not serving the people and leaders who are oppressing the people. What Syria has shown, if the most brutal country can do it, then anybody can. So this is why the West has gone into fifth gear, telling Syrians what you need to do now, what you shouldn't do. Because remember, what the Syrian people showed is if you can overthrow the al-Asad clan, who were the most brutal, then really the other countries aren't that difficult. So despite what's happened in the last 13 years, despite some of the question marks over the guys who are taking over, really the West have got more to worry about. And actually what we've learned is anything can be achieved if we keep at it, we unite. In fact, the rebel group showed actually, when you come together, you're more stronger. You're fighting against each other or fighting against the Kurds wasn't really the issue. So really what you find, brothers, is the issues today are far worse than they were then. The issues are far worse in more countries, and any leader in the Muslim world now has got to look. If this happened in Syria, this could spread. Already in Pakistan, they're saying Bangladesh and Syria has to come to Pakistan. They want that sort of change. Yeah. So that's a positive thing. That's a good thing. And really what we should also discuss now is, yes, we need to remove these systems, we need to uproot them, and then what would come in its place? What should come in its place? How would it work? How would it serve the people? If that discussion happened in the mainstream, it will completely dilute all the demands they've got of how it should be. Minorities. I heard today they go, we need more democracy. I never saw them ask Bashar, we need more democracy in that country. You never see them ask the Saudi leaders, we need more democracy in those countries. So inshallah, the region's in a good place. Bashar going, the regime going, you can see the outpouring of emotion by everyone is definitely a good thing. But in a way, brothers, the one part of the job's done, which is for the regime. The other part then is to physically replace it and actually put systems in place. And that's really what the work is now, inshallah. وكل كل هذا واستغفر الله والحمد لله رب العالمين